Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. The increased concentration of the sobriety potion leading to mental confusion after consumption was a very complicated problem in itself. It involved almost astronomical changes and conflicts. Other than a pharmacist of the divine smith level, there was probably no one else who could grasp each and every change in the potion. The old and the young in the seats were considered top figures in pharmaceutics, one was a master and the other a guru. But they had talked for a long time and yet still failed to figure out any solution. Instead, old Graham learned a lot from the discussion. What he had never heard nor thought about before came up in his head all at once, and all kinds of unheard of novel theories had been an eye-opener for old Graham. As for Rowling, who was listening at the side, it all sounded Greek to her. She only had a superficial knowledge of potions anyway, and sitting in front of her were a master and a guru in pharmaceutics. What they were discussing was already beyond Rowling's understanding, so at the end, she simply couldn't hear what the two men were talking about. She merely sat there, looking at Lin Li with a complicated expression, many times about to speak, but saying nothing in the end. Mage Felix, I've got a few ideas these few days. Do you think it will work? As the conversation went on, old Graham's tone changed from one of discussion to one of asking for advice. Oh? Although the discussion failed to help solve the problems of the sobriety potion, Lin Li could feel from their conversation that old Graham really deserved the title of a master pharmacist. After all, it was decades of accumulated experience. There were some things that sounded new to a guru like him as well. Hearing that old Graham had come up with a question, Lin Li's interest was piqued as well. Tell me about it, maybe we can study about it together. It's like that. Old Graham had just begun to speak when someone else walked into the secluded corner. Lin Li lifted his head and saw Kevin walking towards them with an anxious expression on his face. Something must have happened. Kevin looked tense and his footsteps were hurried, worry was written all over his fair face. Felix. Something has happened. What happened? Don't rush, speak slowly. Lin Li's heart tightened at his words. Kevin had always acted with poise, possessing a demeanor that wouldn't flip even if a mountain collapsed before his eyes. Lin Li had never seen him so flustered after being in the Guild of Magic for so long, especially when the first thing that he said was actually, something has happened. Lin Li knew very well that since Kevin said so, something had to have happened. Just now, there was news from the Demon Fall Valley that Shadow's Nest had launched a sneak attack, killing a dozen mages, and even injuring Uncle Jirian. Kevin gasped for breath, finally making things clear. Shadow's Nest? Lin Li knitted his brows and asked Kevin in a low voice, who else in the guild knows about this? Only you and me. Return immediately. Lin Li pushed his chair aside and said to old Graham apologetically, I'm sorry, Mage Graham. Something has cropped up in the guild, I have to return immediately. If you're still interested in studying potions together, you can find me at the Guild of Magic. I believe President Jirian will be very happy if he knows you're coming. Then I shall not hold you up anymore. In case, old Graham hesitated slightly, then continued, in case there's anything you need help with, you can send someone to look for me at the Castellan Mansion. I will be here these few days. Although I'm getting on in years and not as useful as compared to a few years ago, I should still be able to help you with trivial matters. Then I'll thank you in advance, Mage Graham. As this involved the lifeblood of the Guild of Magic, Lin Li dared not tarry further. After informing Isaac, he set off for the Guild of Magic with Kevin. Looking at Lin Li's receding figure, Rowling bit her lips lightly. Her eyes revealed a complicated emotion. Why, little Rowling? A hint of smile appeared on old Graham's face. With his experience, how could he not see what was on Rowling's mind? Rowling bit her lips, and asked hesitantly after some time, Grandpa Graham, are all potion masters unwilling to impart their knowledge to others? How could it be? There are only two things that a true potion master is proud of in his whole life. One is concocting a new potion, and the other is finding a disciple who can inherit his knowledge. Just like Grandpa Graham, I am over 100 years old, but I'm still busying myself every day with trying to find a good apprentice. Then you've come today. Isn't it all because of Anduin, that old fellow's instigation? I was planning to take that young mage as my disciple. But who knew I'd arrive here to see that he was at the level high enough to be my teacher? At the mention of this, old Grimm's beard curled with anger. Ha ha, though Rolling was upset, she could not help giggling when she heard old Grimm put it in such an interesting way. But after the giggle, there was a look of bashfulness on her face. Then, Grandpa Grimm, do you think I have the gift to become the disciple of a potion master? Little Rolling is thinking of taking someone as your teacher? Old Grimm laughed slyly. I wonder who's the lucky one, getting to teach little Rolling. Let me guess. Anyway, it sure isn't me. Oh right, is it Mage Felix who has just left? Grandpa Grimm, Rolling's pretty face was beaming red, but her voice was somewhat bitter. But he doesn't want to teach me. Why? You have the gift and possess medicinal knowledge. Where can he find such a decent disciple like you? Why is that kid unwilling to teach you? Tell Grandpa Grimm I'll go look for him at the Guild of Magic tomorrow. Pressed by old Grimm, Rolling had no choice but to recount what had happened that day. Old Grimm's brows furrowed as he listened on, and when Rolling finished her story, old Grimm let out a long sigh. No wonder I felt you two kids were behaving awkwardly just now, so that's what happened. But little Rolling, it was really you in the wrong. As a doctor, you can't be willful, especially in a situation concerning the life and death of a patient. I know that I was wrong, Grandpa Grimm. Rolling's expression was aggrieved. But I've apologized after that. Why won't Grandpa Grimm give you an idea? You have an idea? Rolling beautiful eyes lit up at those words. Lin Li had totally no idea what old Grimm had in mind. He was in a hurry now. After returning to the Emerald Tower, both of them had been trying to contact Jirian. But on the crystal ball, there was not a single tree or stone of the Demon Fall Valley. The crystal ball in the Emerald Tower was placed by Jirian personally. It was connected to the Demon Fall Valley through 100 Warlock's Eyes spells. Such situation would not be happening as long as there was even one Warlock's Eyes. Moreover, the Warlock's Eyes was a level 10 magic. With Jirian's level 15 strength, he could easily restore one with no effort. The fact that the crystal ball was completely silent only meant that the battle in the Demon Fall Valley was far more intense than in the news Kevin had received. What do we do now? Kevin's face was already strained after waiting for an hour in the guild's hall. We'll wait and see. Lin Li hesitated slightly. If there is still no news by tomorrow morning, we'll have to make a trip down to Demon Fall Valley. All right. The two of them waited by the crystal ball till the wee hours. Just as the two of them were in a state of extreme anxiety, the crystal ball, which had been silent, lit up finally. Felix, look, there's news. I see it. Both of them rushed forward almost at the same time, only to see Jirian's chubby face. Jirian looked exceptionally haggard in the image within the crystal ball. His usually rosy face was now frighteningly pale, and he looked short of breath. This was the result of an overexertion of the mental strength. The old fellow took some grass off his hair and forced a smile at the two of them. Only then did he say in a weak voice, "Good morning." What exactly happened? Lin Li was worried sick, he was not in the mood for any greetings. What else can it be? Jirian rolled his eyes. It's all because of that rascal from the Shadow's Nest, looking for trouble in the Demon Fall Valley of all places. What about now? Now? I just brought a bunch of people with me to fight back. I guess things will quiet down for the next 10 or more days. Iserhole, that jerk, really doesn't know how the word death is spelled. Just watch, I'll flip the Shadow's Nest over sooner or later. Seeing how Jirian still had the energy for big talk, the two of them who had been waiting in the hall for half the night were relieved at last. All's well as long as nothing happened to you. Other matters can wait till you come back. I'm deadbeat now after waiting for you for so long. You can restore the Warlock's Eyes slowly, I'll go sleep first. Uncle, I'll go to sleep too. Hey! Hey! I've not finished. You two little rascals, this is too much. Jirian returned to the Emerald Tower at noon the next day. Jirian walked into the guild's hall with a murderous look on his face, asking people to find out where Kevin was. Unfortunately, Kevin knew he'd return today, so he had hidden away from the Guild of Magic early in the morning. Jirian couldn't find him anywhere in the Emerald Tower, and at last he had no choice but to knock on Lin Li's door. So early? Lin Li had waited almost the whole night for news the day before and didn't wake up until noon today. He opened the door for Jirian with a sleepy face. I hurried back after I've restored the warlock's eyes. I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open on the road. Jirian walked into the room and lay down on Lin Li's bed regardless of his protests. It's so comfortable lying down. Forget it, take a nap first. I'll let you have the bed. No, I can't sleep yet. Jirian lay for a while, then sat up from the bed. The more I think about what happened in the Demon Fall Valley, the more it feels wrong. I won't sleep today if I don't get to the bottom of it. What's wrong? Warlock's eyes. Perhaps it was due to him being overexhausted, but Jirian's voice sounded slightly hoarse. Damn it, there were so many Warlock's eyes, even I can't remember clearly where they were. How did the people from the Shadow's Nest know? Anyhow, something must be wrong. 125 Warlock's eyes were destroyed almost at the same time and the Shadow's Nest arrived soon after, killing a dozen of our mages in the blink of an eye. If it hadn't been for my timely action, who knows how long the situation would have dragged on. Could it be? They, too, have mages helping them? That's possible. The Shadow's Nest has been expanding ferociously these few years, and could have recruited a few scums, Jirian pondered, then shook his head and dismissed the speculation, but it still isn't right. There were 125 Warlock's eyes. Even I myself couldn't have possibly destroyed them all at the same time. If the Shadow's Nest really has such a formidable character, why would they still do a sneak attack? They could just kill me directly. Other than the Warlock's eyes, there was something else that's abnormal too. These few years, because of the Shadow's Nest, I've spent a great deal of effort on the Demon Fall Valley. Apart from the 125 Warlock's eyes, about 20 additional sentry posts were set up as well. But last night, these 20 sentry posts were as if non-existent. The people of the Shadow's Nest had sneaked in all the way, but I didn't even receive any news. At this point, Lin Li sort of understood what Jirian was trying to say. The Warlock's eyes were destroyed all of a sudden and the people from the Shadow's Nest had gotten a hold of the way to bypass the sentry posts. Almost all the signs were pointing to within the Guild of Magic. Mole. Jirian made his judgment with clenched teeth. There's definitely a mole. No wonder you rushed back early in the morning. Can't be helped. I'm worried there will be a greater disaster if I don't get rid of these guys. You have a clue? Not currently. But it's not hard to look into. Apart from me, you, and Kevin, anyone that has access to the secret of the Warlock's eyes has to be at least a magic shooter. And then, think again, among the magic shooters, who is the most likely to betray the guild? Or, who are the people unhappy with you? Lin Li had understood at this point. That's right. In that instant, both of them were invigorated. Jirian did not sleep, the old and the young conspired in the room to catch the mole. The discussion between the two men lasted until the evening. When Jirian was unable to hold out, Lin Li helped him pull up the blanket and quietly walked out of the bedroom. Jirian was truly furious this time. At dawn the next day, he went out with all the magic shooters from the guild. Such a terrifying force emerging from the Emerald Tower had shaken up Gerosa's city in an instant. The leaders of the various forces were trying desperately to get information about the situation, afraid that they would draw Jirian's fury to themselves. The Castellan mansion was in a state of panic, thinking that Jirian had come because of what had happened at the banquet and was leading a troop of men looking for revenge. Isaac asked for protection from Old Grim while loading Bathriller onto the carriage, sending him back to Alana on the same day. Until, around noon, all the forces suddenly realized that it was a false alarm. It was as if Jirian was out for a stroll. After turning around in Gerosa City, he quietly brought the men back again. He was simply toying with them. The leaders of the dozens of forces broke out in curses. That old bastard Jirian had nothing to do, bringing so many people with him out for a stroll. Could he be any more ostentatious? Of course, no one dared to say it in front of Jirian. Every one of them was scrambling to hide from the fat pestilence when they saw him come out, who still had the guts to provoke him in his face. Hence, no one had noticed that there was an unfamiliar face among the group of magic shooters he led. Now you can speak. Who made you do it? In the basement of the Guild of Magic, Jirian's chubby face was livid. He was interrogating a middle-aged man who appeared to be in his 40s. His eyes were swollen, but the mages present, who had good memory, mostly recognized this middle-aged man. When Lin Li had first arrived at the Guild of Magic, Jirian had caused a lot of dissatisfaction within the guild in order to open up the highest privileges for him. Among them, the most vehement opposition came from several magic shooters, who even threatened to withdraw from the guild in order to pressure Jirian. Who knew they would go for wool and come back shorn? Jirian's obstinacy acted up and he drove them out of the guild instead. And the middle-aged man turned out to be one of the few magic shooters who were driven out by him. His name was something like Luke. I don't know what you are talking about. You don't know? Jirian's face was gloomy, and his eyes looked as if they were about to be ablaze. Then I guess you'd surely not know of the Shadow's Nest, or even the positions of those 125 warlocks' eyes? As for the route that bypasses the sentry posts, it was surely not you who'd sold it to the Shadow's Nest? Jirian, I don't belong to the Guild of Magic anymore. What right do you have to keep me in captivity? Who the fuck cares whether you belong to the Guild of Magic? Jirian's expression was ferocious, and his angry roar echoed in the basement for a long while. I am seeking revenge now. Seeking revenge, you understand? Go out and scream that the Guild of Magic has kept you captive, see whether anyone dares to speak up for you. Still talking about what damn rights, do I need them? Let me tell you, don't think that you can muddle through this by playing dead. You're still waiting for the people of the Shadow's Nest to save you, right? Dream the hell on. You're merely a tool that can only be used once. After they've used it once, they'll never be able to use it again. Do you think they will come and save something that is worthless? You can't malign me. Jirian. You have no proof. You want proof? Jirian pondered for a while and admitted, all right. I really don't have any proof. But it's okay. I am seeking revenge, and seeking revenge does not need any proof. Lin Li was sweating cold sweat while listening at a side. Is an extortion of confession like how you do it? I can't help it. He won't talk, Jirian answered boldly. It's all right if he won't talk. Anyway, this could only be done by the few of them. Other than them, who else in the guild would do that? Jirian's words might sound crude, but his reasoning was sound. Right now, the Guild of Magic dominated Jerosa City, and even the Castellan had to offer his friendship. Wherever the guild's mages went, they'd receive the most generous treatment. Even in the Gilded Rose, the equipment they bought would be given at least a 30% discount. Since the auction, the benefits had never ceased. First, there were the 100 sets of magical equipment gifted by the man's family. They were excellent equipment worth 20,000 to 30,000 gold coins each. With a wave of his hands, Jirian sent it all to the mages in the guild. As long as they'd reached the level of a magic shooter, they'd be qualified to apply for a set. And not long after, it was another 100 bottles of sobriety potion. On the day the news was announced, a group of elderly mages was thrilled to tears on the spot. They could not remember how many years it had been since they had had a whiff of the sobriety potion. When they returned with a bottle of sobriety potion in their hands, they felt as if they were living in heaven. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Lin Li was in the Guild of Magic, no mage would be willing to leave. What could the Shadow's Nest give them? It was nothing but money and equipment. The Guild of Magic had no lack of these. Every year, millions of gold coins were collected from the Demon Fall Valley, and now, 100 sets of equipment were provided at once, and various kinds of potions were distributed continuously. bathed in such great happiness, who'd be willing to leave? Perhaps only the few magic shooters kicked out of the guild would be that down and out to the point of betraying the secrets of the Guild of Magic. Granted, strictly speaking, this would indeed not be considered a betrayal. After being kicked out by Jirian, they had no more connections with the Guild of Magic. Selling the secrets to the Shadow's Nest would only count as revenge on the Guild of Magic at most. However, Jirian would not care about these. Whether it was betrayal or revenge, it had dealt damage to the interests of the Guild of Magic. Damaging the interests of the Guild of Magic would be equivalent to damaging his own interests, and the one who damaged his interests had to be destroyed, such was Jirian's logic. Forget it, let me handle this matter. Lin Li knew Jirian's character too well. He was afraid this unlucky magic shooter wouldn't say things right, getting Jirian all riled up to the point of blasting a fireball at him, and then they'd have nothing left at all. Jirian was surprised. You know how to extort a confession? I don't know. Lin Li shook his head. He fumbled about in his pockets and pulled out a glass bottle. But it knows. I'll make a trip to the potion lab for a while, don't touch him for now, Lin Li reminded Jirian before he left the basement. I'll listen to you this time. Jirian watched Lin Li leave, and threatened the unlucky magic shooter in a gloating manner, retard, you were given a chance just now, but didn't know how to grasp it. Now, you've roused that kid. He may look gentle, but his strikes are more savage than mine. You've forced him to take action in person, who knows what kind of sick potion he'll concoct this time. Maybe it's the kind that itches and festers all over and takes a year of pain before dying. The middle-aged man felt chill in his body as he listened to Jirian's horrifying description. But he was still holding out. Because there was one thing that even Jirian would not have guessed, he did not sell the defense arrangement of the Demon Fall Valley to Shadow's Nest, instead, he sold it to someone else, and that someone else had promised he could worry not about the guild's revenge, because the Guild of Magic would be uprooted by him soon. Still won't talk? Forget it, even if you want to speak now, I won't listen to it. Anyway, that kid would be concocting the potion in a moment. You'd even come clean about the age you had your first wet dreams. Lin Li, who was busy in the potion lab, had no idea how Jirian was intimidating the unlucky magic shooter. He was meticulously calculating the dose of the potion now. This was the first time he'd actually concocted the fear potion since he had gotten hold of the formula, so he was naturally more prudent in the process. Any person would have some negative emotions hidden in his heart. The effect of the fear potion was to trigger these negative emotions and magnify them indefinitely. Among the three ingredients, the nightmare seed and devil's tears possessed a similar effect. After mixing them, the effect would be greatly enhanced. In order to avoid excessive fear leading to a mental breakdown, a certain amount of peace bloom was added to calm the mind. The succus from the nightmare seed was boiling in the beaker. Lin Li held a peace bloom in his hand, gingerly plucking the petals one by one. This was a very crucial process. Excessive amounts of peace bloom would seriously reduce the effect of the fear potion. If there were too little peace bloom, it would not achieve the purpose of calming the mind. So, every time Lin Li tore a petal off, he would gently shake the beaker and wait for the petal to dissolve fully in the potion before judging whether the dose was enough according to the color. After all, this was his first concoction of this kind, unlike the arcane magic potion, where the result could be judged by experience alone. When the seventh peace bloom petal was added, the nightmare seed succus in the beaker began to turn turbid. Lin Li knew that it was a sufficient dosage of the peace bloom, so he picked up a devil's tears from his pocket. The devil's tears was a kind of black fruit about the size of the pinky. It tasted bitter and astringent, and if consumed directly, it would create all sorts of horrifying illusions. Unless a tranquilizing drug was taken, one would never be able to get out of this illusion, and would continue to be tormented until he finally broke down. Lin Li pulled out the silver knife from the ring of endless storm and gently cut off the skin of the devil's tears. When he saw a drop of succus about to spill, he quickly dropped it into the beaker. A plume of mist rose up instantly. The potion fused with the succus of the devil's tears immediately filled the potion lab with an intoxicating fragrance. It was a rather unique aroma, like one of a vintage wine that was too thick to diffuse and full of deadly allure. Bearing the temptation of the fragrance, Lin Li poured the contents of less than half of the beaker into the glass bottle he had prepared and then secured the bottle opening tightly. When he returned to the basement, he overheard Jirian threatening the unlucky magic shooter. "Don't blame me for not reminding you. You don't have much time left. When that kid comes out of the potion lab, I'm really afraid that it'll be too late for you to cry." "Cry what?" Lin Li heard Jirian slandering him upon entering the door. "Heh. Nothing, nothing. How did the concoction go? If it's not done yet, you can go and study it over again. Such a thing like extorting a confession, I can do it as well." "You're still going to do it?" Lin Li was startled. "Another move by you, and this guy will be scared to death." "I'm doing this for his own good." The old fellow just had to boast shamelessly. Lin Li came to the magic shooter with the glass bottle in his hand. "Do you drink it yourself, or do I feed you?" The shameless intimidation by Jirian had cast a shadow of potions in the middle-aged man's heart. When he saw Lin Li coming over with the glass bottle in his hand, he was scared out of his wits at once, shaking his head desperately while subconsciously retreating backward, but he had only retreated a few steps when his body pressed against the cold wall. The middle-aged man's heart was cold, just like the wall behind him. His magic shooter strength was useless, having his mana sealed by Jirian. Now, he was no better than an ordinary man. He could only watch Lin Li open the bottle cap and let the intoxicating fragrance pervade the basement. "You actually want me to feed you?" Lin Li frowned, his hand gripping the middle-aged man's chin. Don't blame me for being too rough." The middle-aged man really wanted to cry. He was a magic shooter, highly respected everywhere he went. However, at present, he was held by the chin by a young mage who wasn't over 20 years of age, who even threatened to douse him with the potion violently. "You'll really drink it on your own?" Lin Li glanced at him skeptically, yet warned him kindly, "You'd better not have any tricks up your sleeves. I've concocted a few dozen bottles of this potion altogether. If you break this bottle, don't blame me for dousing you with bottle after bottle. I won't care if anything bad happens then." The unlucky magic shooter was about to break the bottle upon receiving it, but his hand froze in midair when he heard Lin Li's words. After weighing the gains and losses, the middle-aged man, trembling, eventually brought the glass bottle to his lips. At last, he accepted his fate, and with his eyes closed, he gulped the bottle of potion down. "Drink slowly, won't be good to choke on it," Lin Li reminded him kindly again, then turned to Jirian and said, "You do your interrogation slowly. I'm going out to take a breather first, let me know when there's news." After sitting in the hall for less than half an hour, Lin Li saw the basement door open. Jirian emerged with a look of fear on his face, and the mages who followed behind revealed an expression of awe when they looked at Lin Li. Jirian found a chair to sit in and asked Lin Li with lingering fear, "What potion did you give him? Why is it so brutal?" "I've only asked him casually, and that fellow spilled everything out while begging for forgiveness, asking me to have mercy on him. Damn it, I've never even done much to him." The fear potion is like that, indefinitely magnifying all kinds of negative emotions. Anything would fill him with fear. "Maybe you were tormenting him with various kinds of savage tortures in his fantasy." Lin Li casually mentioned the effects of the fear potion and then asked curiously, "So, what exactly did he say?" "Simply put, these three bastards were unhappy with me kicking them out of the guild. Then, someone offered a high price as a lure, so they coolly sold the defense arrangement of the Demon Fall Valley." At this point, Jirian sighed guiltily. "If we were to pursue this matter, it's actually my fault. After I had driven them out of the guild, I should have adjusted the defense arrangement of the Demon Fall Valley." The three of them had actually replenished the mana of 125 warlock's eyes back then, and those 20 sentry posts were actually arranged by the three of them as well. But I got so busy with the auction that I totally forgot about it. Plus, I actually thought that the Shadow's Nest wouldn't dare to mess with the Guild of Magic. Then it turned out to be such a big matter. "It is indeed your negligence," Lin Li nodded. Apart from him, the other two fellows were the accomplices. But consider them lucky today that I didn't manage to pull them out when I went out this morning. According to this guy, they've sought refuge with one of the forces of Gerosis City, but I've yet to confirm whether that is true. Looks like we have to hold another auction another day. I've got to dig those fellows out, no matter how. Quit counting on me. Lin Li knew what the old fellow was thinking upon hearing his words. He did not want to spend his days in the potion lab. It was not easy for him to come to a totally unfamiliar world. There were still many places he had not ventured to, many things that he had not tried. How would he be content with staying in the potion lab all day? Just saying. Never mind, let's not talk about this. Let's talk about business. Jirian pursed his lips and then lowered his voice. You'll never imagine who bought the defense arrangement of the Demon Fall Valley from him. Who? Evan, Matthew's hussy brother. Damn, he's got guts. Lin Li was astounded, but quickly calmed down. Evan Merlin's that stupid? This is such a shady business, he could have sent someone to do it for him. How could he be so stupid to do it personally and even be identified? Evan didn't go personally, but sent a low-level mage to contact him. But this fellow was not assured after the contact, so he secretly tailed the person Evan sent. Just think, he has the strength of a magic shooter, it's nothing for him to tail a low-level mage. So after tailing him, he found out who was the mastermind behind it. This fellow has saved us some trouble indeed. Lin Li mulled over it carefully. The Merlin family was really weird. Ever since the battle with Jirian, Matthew had disappeared from the scene, and even Cromwell had not shown his face in front of anyone. The only thing that was related to them was the 800,000 gold coins deal at the auction. Saved trouble? Jirian swore as he grumbled. The Merlin family is sure to have something to do with the Shadow's Nest. Darn, I've got a headache just thinking about it. One Shadow's Nest is trouble enough, now there's the Merlin family. An enemy in the dark is a terrifying thing. Since we know who is looking for trouble now, this matter is much simpler. Why, could it be that you're afraid of old Merlin? I'm afraid of him? Jirian glared and was about to utter something crude when he thought of the battle outside Emerald Tower and smiled embarrassedly. But he's surely not afraid of me too. If it wasn't for your awakening potion last time, I'd probably be dead in his hands. What can one bottle do? I'm planning to give you a bag of it this time. Even if you drink one and toss the other one away, you can still tire him out to death. Lin Li said with clenched teeth, and then asked Jirian again, oh, right, how long is it until my duel with Cromwell? Not many days left. But that kid is a useless bum, no need to worry. Hard to say. Old Merlin is not an idiot. Since he dared to put in such a request, he must have his own plan. I need to seize the time and enhance my magic level. It'd be best if I can reach the magic shooter level before the duel, then I'll have more confidence to deal with Cromwell. Do you have any ways to enhance the magic level in the shortest time? Dream on. Jirian gave Lin Li an angry glare. If there was a way to enhance the magic level in the shortest time, would dozens of bottles of arcane magic potion be selling for millions of gold coins? No, now I remember, there is indeed such a way. Jirian hadn't finished his sentence when he suddenly recalled something. I've read about it in a magic book some time ago. The High Elves have a way to enhance the magic level by force. It is said that the highest level it can go is by 5 levels. But after the enhancement by force, the person's potential for life will be completely exhausted, and there will never be any progress. You can keep it to yourself. I'll just drink a few more bottles of potion when the time comes to keep it safe. Why are you suddenly placing such great importance on this duel? Because I don't want to worry about the Merlin family doing something behind our backs when we're dealing with the Shadow's Nest. Jirian couldn't help the surprise showing on his face when he heard it. You want to deal with the Merlin family? Not me. Lin Li shook his head and smiled innocently. The person who is going to deal with the Merlin family is the Archmage, President Jirian. Starting tomorrow, President Jirian will be launching a comprehensive crackdown on the Merlin family. By the time it comes to the duel, old Merlin will probably be mad as hell and would vent it all on me. I think I'd better bring a few more bottles of potions to protect myself. The two bastards were discussing how to deal a blow to the Merlin family when they heard a guild's mage come forward to inform them that Mage Grim Burnside came. Grim Burnside. Jirian seemed to have been struck by lightning as he sat dazed on the chair for a long while before stammering out his instructions. Hurry. Hurry and invite Mage Grim Burnside in. Jirian immediately went out with excitement when he heard about the legendary mage's visit, but halfway through, he stopped as doubt came over him. Grim Burnside never had any dealings with the Guild of Magic, why would he suddenly come calling? The mage who had passed on the message swallowed his saliva and replied with seemingly much difficulty, said he came to see Mage Felic. Jirian stared at Lin Li with jealousy. How did you know Grim Burnside? He attended the banquet at the Castellan mansion a few days ago. Damn. Kid, your luck is extraordinary. There are only 2 legendary mages in Gerosis and you know them both. Jirian grunted as he walked out of the Emerald Tower. He saw Grim Burnside standing below the stairs in his grey mage robe and quickly put on a warm smile on his face. Welcome. The Gerosis Guild of Magic is deeply honored by Mage Grim's visit to the Emerald Tower. You're too polite, President Jirian. Old Grim still had the gentle smile on his face. He then directed his smile at Lin Li. Long time no see, Mage Felic. The 3 men exchanged greetings below the stairs, and Jirian solemnly escorted Old Grim into the guild hall. For the Guild of Magic, Grim Burnside's visit was truly a sensational event. Even Jirian, who was usually arrogant, dared not show a slight negligence. The reception was of the highest class, enough to make the leaders of all the forces in Gerosis red-eyed with envy. In order to receive Grim Burnside, Jirian had summoned all the mages in the guild. Even those stationed far away in the Demon Fall Valley were to pass on their welcome message through the crystal ball in the hall. The scene was spectacular and lively, and even Grim Burnside, who had lived for over 100 years and regarded all things lightly, couldn't help but like Jirian a little more. Looking at Jirian beaming away, Lin Li was worried for the leaders of the various forces in Gerosis in spite of himself. Jirian had deliberately made it sensational so that news of this day's event could spread as far as possible. When the leaders of the 17 forces knew that the legendary mage had visited them, who knew how terrified they'd be. After the impressive welcoming ceremony, Old Grim and Lin Li went into the potion lab to continue the unfinished discussion they had had on the day of the banquet. This time, Jirian, who always liked to be involved, did not follow them in. He was in the guild hall, delivering a speech to all the mages. The speech took a long time, but the content circled around a single topic: the Merlin family and the Shadow's Nest had joined hands. Such were Jirian's words: "You bunch of fellows are going to rot staying in the Emerald Tower for the whole day. From today onwards, everyone must hang around Gerosis City. What you want to do is up to you. As long as it makes the Merlin family uncomfortable, I will support it all. Whoever has the ability to do away with the bastard, Matthew, I will reward him with a year's worth of profits from the Demon Fall Valley." The Guild of Magic had put up with Jirian as long as the number of years he had been the president. Among the mages present, who had never experienced the contemptuous looks from others? Each and every one of the 17 forces in Gerosis City had dared to throw their weight around the Guild of Magic. And among them, the Merlin family had demanded from the guild time and again. Even someone like Cromwell had dared to come up and demand that Jirian kick Lin Li out of the guild. No matter how wise or how calm a mage was, it was inevitable to be antagonized in face of such reality. After so many years of tolerance, the anger accumulated in their hearts was enough to ignite the entire Emerald Tower. And with the rise of the Guild of Magic, the fury in their hearts grew day by day. When the Shadow's Nest launched that surprise attack on the Demon Fall Valley, that fury was pushed to the peak. The Guild of Magic had been silent for these 2 days, but everyone knew that this was just the calm before the storm. And now, Jirian's words had completely ignited the Guild of Magic. There were 36 magic shooters and 113 mages in the Emerald Tower, in addition to the people who were stationed in the Demon Fall Valley. The mage apprentices below level 5 were numerous, and by the afternoon, nearly half of them were driven out to the city by Jirian. A terrible chaos was caused with such a force swarming into the city of Gerosis. Just this afternoon, the Merlin family's businesses in Gerosis City had suffered huge losses. First, a fire was started in several industries located in the city center. Then, a few mysterious mages appeared in the casinos the Merlins ran with the Blood Brotherhood. It was obvious that the mages had come to make trouble, because they were utterly arrogant. Who was in charge of this casino? The few mages demanded to see the casino's in charge as soon as they entered. The men from the Blood Brotherhood went out to have a look, just to see they were people from the Guild of Magic. Who in Gerosis City would dare to provoke them now? So they fled through the back door, leaving behind a few men from the Merlin family who had no choice but to face them. Damn it, when are you going to return us the money you borrowed? What money? The man from the Merlin family only hesitated slightly, and the few fellows who were at least the level of a magic shooter suddenly turned hostile. This was simply worse than a beast, totally not giving the other party a chance to admit they were wrong before smashing the casino with their magic powers, then finishing it off by igniting a fire before they left to look for another target. The most immoral of them all was undoubtedly the gang, consisting of more than a dozen mages. This bunch of fellows turned around the city but couldn't find a place to start, so they went out of Gerosis City, straight to the Mariana Canal. When they saw the Merlin family's merchant ship in the middle of the canal, their eyes flashed like a hungry beast seeing its prey. Each of them downed a bottle of sobriety potion and a wave of spell recitation resounded. Before people on the merchant ship could react, a monstrous blaze rose to the skies. That dozen of mages joined hands to unleash a level 8 flaming storm. To the people from the Merlin family, it was like the end of the world. Countless fire dragons raged and roared, and the blazing flames devoured the huge merchant ship in a single instant. The people on board were lucky enough to escape with a few small sampans. But the goods that were worth millions of gold coins on the merchant ship were burned to ashes by the fire. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. The news soon spread through the whole Gerosis City like wind. Everyone was flabbergasted, including Castle and Isaac. They were shocked by the Guild of Magic's high-handedness. To them, the Guild of Magic now was absolutely an unreasonable bandit. All the while, the forces in Gerosis had been able to maintain a semblance of calm because everything was done behind closed doors. The struggle between the major forces had always existed, but no one had dared to put it on the table. Often, there were two forces fighting in secret, but when the two leaders met, they would talk harmoniously about wine and roses. It was like when the auction was held, of all the various forces present, who did not have any enmity with another. But under the seduction of the 33 bottles of arcane magic potion, the auction still went smoothly and no one was killed on the spot. Everyone knew that the Guild of Magic had the supremacy in Gerosis now. But no one could have imagined that they would be so arrogant and insolent, completely disregarding the rules of the game and directly putting the fight on the table. In just one afternoon, the Guild of Magic wiped out more than 20 businesses of the Merlin family. These included several casinos ran jointly with the Blood Brotherhood and 2 merchant ships moored in the canal. This afternoon alone, the Merlin family lost countless gold coins. For a while, all the forces were outraged, especially the Blood Brotherhood, which had several casinos smashed by the guild's mages. Aaron Matsis almost had an heart attack from the rage. "Fuck you, Jirian. You're seeking death like this. If you continue to do this, we'll all just have to die together." But in the face of Jirian's anger, who would dare to go to the Emerald Tower to reason with him? The leaders of the dozens of forces were not idiots. The incident that happened at the Demon Fall Valley and the Guild of Magic's revenge on the Merlin family, it was obvious what was the connection between them. Everyone knew that Jirian was retaliating, so who would be that ignorant to offer themselves up in such a sensitive time? The chaos did not subside until evening. At this time, the Merlin family was already in disorder. When news came in the afternoon, anger had seized old Merlin's heart and he fainted right on the spot. When he woke up, his face was still livid as he ordered the servants to call for his brother, Evan. "Look at what you've done." Old Merlin seemed to have aged several decades after he woke up. The ever-energetic Matthew looked so old and weak at the moment. Big brother. Let me explain. Explain? Old Merlin's face was leaden, and his somewhat murky eyes stared fixedly at Evan. How many times have I told you? Things must be done cleanly and never leave any tail behind. Look at what you have done. Of the 3 traitors from the Guild of Magic, 2 have been poached by other forces, and the remaining one is even more impressive, getting found by the Guild of Magic. I really can't understand, what exactly are you trying to do? Why did you not silence him? Do you think the Merlin family today can still be as reckless as we were in the past? Evan opened his mouth, trying to defend himself. I've only wanted to give it a shot, see if I could persuade them to work for the family. After all, they are magic shooters. It's a pity to kill them off. I'm doing it for the sake of the family. For the sake of the family? Ha ha ha, old Merlin laughed in anger, streaks of blood were apparent in his eyes. Now, are you happy? Just this afternoon, the Merlin family has been greatly undermined. Do you know how much we have lost in the afternoon? Including the 2 ships in the canal, it's a total of 3,700,000 gold coins. Evan. It's 3,700,000 gold coins. Is the family earning so much in 1 year? And the 2 merchant ships were the ones that helped the Duke smuggle his goods. Fario had a hard time setting this up for us, but after what happened, do you think the Duke will still be willing to trust us? Evan was completely dumbfounded hearing the huge figure. Forget it, old Merlin sighed heavily, his expression dejected. Let's not talk about this first. To be honest, I have to bear a little responsibility too. I knew you have been indecisive since young, but I still allowed you to handle this matter. How's Cromwell lately? Cromwell is improving fast. He has reached level 12 yesterday. Not bad, there was finally a glimmer of relief on old Merlin's face when he heard the news, but his expression turned gloomy at once. This kid has been getting more sensible lately. Unfortunately, as descendants of the Merlin family, we sometimes have to make some sacrifices. Big brother, Evan hesitated. He paused between words as he said, Cromwell is the only heir of the Merlin family. Even if he could kill that pharmacist from the Guild of Magic in the duel this time, his whole life would be completely ruined. A magic shooter who would never progress. Isn't this a little too cruel to Cromwell? It is a necessary sacrifice. Old Merlin's expression was cast in shade, but the look in his eyes was extremely resolute. What the Guild of Magic has today was brought by the mage called Felic. Do you remember my battle with Jirian? If he hadn't taken out the bottle of awakening potion, Jirian would long be dead. I knew then that as long as this young man is present, the Guild of Magic would come to dominate Gerosa City sooner or later. The arcane magic potion auction confirmed my speculations. 2 major families had conveyed their friendly intentions at the same time. Did you think they were trying to butter up to Jirian? You are wrong, they were actually trying to butter up to that young potion master. But, I heard that Felic is merely a low-level mage. Cromwell doesn't necessarily have to. Low-level mage? Old Merlin chuckled bitterly. Didn't Cromwell tell you that the other party had only used a magic spell to cast him out of the Emerald Tower? This is a real magic genius. He possesses an extremely powerful mental strength and mana. Even I had to utilize my archmage strength to defeat him. It will be terrifying to allow such a magic genius like him to grow. He has to die in this duel. When old Merlin had finished, he closed his eyes wearily and never looked at the horrified Evan again. Gerosa City was in disorder, but the Emerald Tower was unusually quiet. About half the mages were out, leaving behind some mage apprentices below level 5 and a few others, such as Jirian and Lin Li. Old Grim looked up from a pile of beakers and asked in a seemingly casual way, Felic, when I saw you teaching Bathriller a lesson that day at the banquet, you should have been at the strength of level 9? About there, I've reached level 9, just a few days ago. Lin Li nodded and then continued gloomily, but strangely, lately I feel that I've run into a bottleneck again. It's the feeling that you know you have the potential, but you just can't exert it. Oh? Despite having some understanding of Lin Li's strength, Old Grim did not expect that he would be encountering a bottleneck in his breakthrough to the magic shooter level at such a young age. For a moment, the old man was intrigued. Does the Guild of Magic have a practice ground? I'll have a look at your situation first and then see if I can provide you with any suggestions. That'll be great. After this afternoon, the old and the young gradually became familiar with each other. There was less politeness, but more intimacy in their conversations. The two men went downstairs and spoke to Jirian, hoping to find a suitable place for actual combat. But when the old fellow heard that the legendary mage was about to showcase his skills, he forgot all about the proper business and insisted on going with them to have a look. At last, Lin Li failed to dissuade him and had to let him bring the both of them up to the 3rd level. This is the best place. You can use any spells here. As long as it's not a legendary level spell, it will be no problem. Jirian fished out a key and unlocked the tightly shut door. Initially, Lin Li thought he was bragging. But when he poked his head in to take a look, he realized Jirian was actually too modest. On the spotlessly white wall, there were 6 magical shield fields and 6 elements annihilation fields. With the 12 magewiths laid out, the room was an impregnable fortress. Not to mention ordinary spells, even if a legendary level spell was used, it would be difficult to blow the room apart. Impressive, in Amril, even the general mages would have studied inscriptions, much less a legendary mage like Old Grim, whose accomplishments in inscriptions were also extraordinary. The moment he entered the room, his eyes naturally fell onto the 12 magewiths. This is by Delavi? Old Grim was rather amazed, passing before the 12 magewiths. You have fine eyes, Mage Grim. This was indeed designed by Master Delavi 1,300 years ago, when the Guild of Magic was established. Lin Li was rather lost. Who is Delavi? A level 22 mage. Old Grim's expression revealed a look of yearning. Level 22. Lin Li was startled. Even a half-baked mage like him knew that as the magic level reached the realm of an archmage, even a single level of ascension could bring about a nearly qualitative change in power, not to mention the legendary realm above the archmage. A level 22 mage would probably equal up to 10 Andoins, and that was a conservative estimate. Lin Li had no idea that there had been such a powerful person in Jerosa's Guild of Magic. But his greatest achievement in life was actually in inscriptions. If it weren't for him, the study of inscriptions today might be a totally different story. He was the first person to combine inscriptions and magic. Since then, inscriptions have become a required course for mages. Felik, after talking about Delavi's achievements, Old Grim took a few steps back. That day at the banquet, I saw that you had done a good job in releasing the icicles. Why don't you try again now and attack me using the wind blade? Okay. Just focus on your spell, don't worry about hurting me. Afraid that Lin Li would worry about hurting him, Old Grim specially reminded him. Lin Li nodded, and his expression became serious. There was no recitation nor even the slightest sign. Lin Li raised a hand and an icicle tore through the air. Driven by Lin Li's tremendous mana, the icicle was as fast as lightning. As soon as it was released, it disintegrated into the air, creating a blue stream of light. But as the stream of light approached Old Grim, it stopped without warning and just hung quietly in front of his chest. It was like there was an invisible hand in the air, catching it with an unparalleled speed. There was a smile of approval on Old Grim's face. Very well done. But it's still not enough this time. When you were teaching Bathriller a lesson a few days ago, you had unleashed a few spells consecutively, so you should have ample mana. Don't stop. This time, we'll change it to the wind blade, release as many as your mana allows. Jirian touched his nose in spite of himself when he heard it. Okay. From the previous icicle, Lin Li knew that Old Grim's strength was fathomless and that it was impossible to hurt him with his own strength. Hence, he showed no mercy anymore and the wind blades came one after another. In an instant, the shrill sound of tearing filled the air and dozens of wind blades fell down like raindrops. But all these wind blades, without an exception, were met with the invisible wall, none of them ever touched the corner of Old Grim's robe. With the strength of a legendary mage, it was impossible for Old Grim to be hurt by a few low-level spells. He didn't even require any magical shields, it was enough to protect himself from harm just by releasing his own mana, like what he had done when he'd saved Bathriller at the banquet. There was deep admiration in Old Grim's eyes as he watched Lin Li release the wind blades. Anduin's judgment was indeed right, this was a true magic genius, skillful and with an abundance of mana, just like Anduin in the past. The only difference was, he was much younger than Anduin had been back then and had a deeper understanding of magic. But as time went by and the wind blades Lin Li released were already in the hundreds, the admiration in Old Grim's eyes gradually turned to amazement. The mana of this young mage seemed to be overly abundant. Although the wind blade was just a level 1 magic, he couldn't afford to unleash it like this. The power consumed by more than 200 level 1 spells was already well beyond the reach of a level 9 mage. From the look on his face, the young mage did not seem to be tired at all. Over 100 level 1 spells was as easy as eating and drinking water for him. No wonder Anduin had mentioned many times that this kid was nothing but a monster. Old Grim thought he was talking about pharmaceutics, but now it suddenly dawned on him that Anduin was talking about the kid's freak mana. Jirian was laughing up his sleeve when he saw the look of amazement on Old Grim's face, and the thoughts in his mind were more or less sinister. It doesn't seem to be a big deal being frightened by this freak back then. See? I wasn't the only one, now even the legendary mage is startled. Stop. When there were about 300 or 400 wind blades released by Lin Li, Old Grim finally called for a timeout. President Jirian, can you tell me, how long was his mana output when Felik was going through his level certification? Jirian paused for a while and crept beside Old Grim's ear. 28 minutes. What? Old Grim almost jumped upon hearing it. The look on his face was no different from Jirian's back then. He looked at Lin Li as if he was looking at a monster. In the face of such a freak with infinite mana, there was no difference whether it was an archmage or a legendary mage. In fact, they did not know that what they were feeling now had been felt by Anduin several times back in the Sunset Mountains. Old Grim wavered. He had wanted to find the root of the problem from the strength of the mana, but now it seemed that Lin Li's mana was infinite, and so that seemed doomed to be in the wrong direction. Actually, I feel that what Felik lacks most now is actual combat. Both of them were startled at Jirian's words. Lin Li mulled it over and realized it seemed to be true indeed. When he was in the Sunset Mountains, he was faced with different magical beasts every day, beasts from level 4 to level 8, from manticores to wyverns. He was struggling on the delicate line between life and death almost every day. In this struggle, his magic level had improved dramatically. From a mage apprentice to a level 8 mage, it seemed to be just the blink of an eye, without feeling any hindrance at all. And then he got to Jerosa City. There were better learning conditions, but the time he used magic was suddenly reduced. The number of real battles was pitifully few, a mere total of 3.5. In 3 of these, he had gained an absolute upper hand. The only time he couldn't win was the pure mental strength battle with Old Merlin. But none of them had used any spells, and so, strictly speaking, it should only be counted half a time. At the same time, Lin Li's magic level stagnated all of a sudden. If he hadn't benefited greatly from the battle between the 2 archmages, he would still have been at level 8. Magic was such a strange thing. Having a huge mana and mastering a lot of spells did not necessarily mean a stronger fighting capacity. Many things could only be comprehended during actual combat. Just like pharmaceutics, someone who knew a large number of formulas was not necessarily a master of potions. He probably wouldn't be able to concoct a sobriety potion when it came to the application. President Jirian is right. Let's do it this way. I have nothing else to do these few days anyway. Why don't I help you improve your actual combat experience? This doesn't seem appropriate? Lin Li scratched his head and hesitated. You are the legendary mage. Isn't it the same as seeking death if I practice with you? Don't worry about this, I'll only use the strength of a magic shooter, and the spells I use won't be over level 10. Jirian was like an ant on a hot pan, glancing at Lin Li continuously. This little bastard will be the death of me. The legendary mage wants to deliberately suppress his power in order to give him advice, and he is still dallying there. If it was me, I would already jump on him directly. Alright, Lin Li nodded and took a few steps back. Wait. Old Grim suddenly called out at this point. This habit of yours is really bad. Lin Li was about to cast an ice armor spell on himself when he heard Old Grim calling for a pause. He stood there dazed, and asked in bewilderment, what habit? Retreating before you cast a spell. Old Grim pointed to the spot Lin Li stood at previously. You did the same thing just now when you were releasing the icicles, taking a few steps backward before casting the spell. This is a bad habit. A mage is not an archer, there's no need to distance yourself deliberately, and even more so there's no need to make use of the surrounding environment to win a battle. A real mage can take control of the rhythm of the battle in an instant, at any distance, and in any environment. What we use is always our own strength. Lin Li listened quietly. He knew that this was indeed his shortcoming. His hunter profession in the endless world had brought him a good sense of rhythm, but it also brought him a lot of deep-rooted bad habits. For example, retreating before the battle out of habit. For example, adding the hastening spell on himself during combat and using the delaying spell on his enemy to slow them down in order to maintain his advantage in speed. For example, placing too much emphasis on the distance between himself and the enemy. Etc., etc. For a mage, there was no need at all to do such things. You must remember, in a mage's battle, there'll always be two kinds of rhythm, control and outburst. I'll keep that in mind, Lin Li nodded thoughtfully. At the same time, a shot of wind blade tore through the air. This time, he did not retreat at all. Heh heh. You've learnt fast. Old Grim could only use the power of a magic shooter, and it was no longer possible to block the wind blade with his mana alone. But the old man still looked unhurried, and almost as soon as the wind blade roared, the ice armor spell was summoned. The wind blade cut through the glittering ice and made a shrill noise. Old Grim's counterattack was quite different from Lin Li's. Under the protection of the ice shield, the old man began his recitations. His recitations were not fast, and even were slower than Lin Li's, to some extent, but there was a sense of skill and fluency, with no pause in the middle. By the time the last spell fell, 7 arcane missiles had coalesced into shape. With a wave of his hand, the 7 arcane missiles fired at Lin Li at the same time. In an instant, the ice armor was shattered, and the elemental shield that was just propped up was reduced to a thin layer. It would only take one spell from Old Grim to break it completely. Lin Li was barely maintaining the functioning of the elemental shield, but there was no panic on his face. He retaliated with mana feedback that interrupted the casting rhythm of Old Grim. At the same time, he began to recite the spell for delirium, hoping to drag the combat into a match of pure mental strength. The surging mana of Old Grim slowed down abruptly following the mana retroaction from Lin Li. The 7 arcane missiles lost control and vanished in an instant. Old Grim still remained unhurried, his thin arm rose slightly and a mental protection field rose. Under the safety of the mental protection field, Lin Li's delirium spell was like a stone thrown into a pond, merely creating ripples on the calm water. Both had amazing casting speed, one was swift and the other fluent. Lin Li was constantly challenging the limits of magic counter-reaction by virtue of his superior mental strength. Old Grim relied on years of experience to minimize the length of the spell. Jirian, who watched from the side, exclaimed countless times in his heart. These two fellows, young and old, behaved nothing like a normal human being. It was a dazzling combat, with a tremendous rate of casting. The transition between attack and defense was often made in the blink of an eye. Often, they cast a spell and would cast protection on themselves, before the spell could even fall on the opponent. Old Grim was a legendary mage after all. Although he was using only the power of a magic shooter, the legendary level vision and experience were still there. The choices he made in between the counterattacks, seemingly casual, often hit Lin Li's vulnerable point. Not to mention that, in his long life, he had accumulated a huge amount of spellcasting skills. In the face of such skills, any genius could not help but appear feeble and futile. After the failure of the mana retroaction, Lin Li, who had been grappling for long, gave out at last. At the moment the mana retroaction failed, Lin Li knew it was a trap. Old Grim first used a lot of low-level spells to suppress Lin Li, and when Lin Li was so overwhelmed that he couldn't even lift his head, Old Grim departed from his usual style and cast a flaming storm instead. Lin Li was all too familiar with this level 9 spell. It had power comparable to that of the magic shooter and a horribly long recitation. Lin Li, who had completely lost the opportunity, had only two options in the face of this level 9 spell. One was to force out the elemental shield, and be in a state of no protection from the elemental shield for about 30 seconds. The second was to risk being tricked again and carry on with another mana retroaction. Lin Li chose to take the risk, and then he was tricked. This was a classic example of deceit that was worth including in magic textbooks. As early as the moment the spell sounded, Old Grim had already cut off the mana output. Breaking off a spell was a skill that every mage needed to learn, let alone Old Grim, who was already a powerhouse in the legendary realm. For him, it was no more difficult to break off a flaming storm than to eat and drink. At this time, although the spell was still being recited, there was no mana output at all. Mana retroaction, of course, could only react against mana. For a magic spell that did not produce any mana, the mana retroaction was like a punch in the air and had no effect at all. Apart from a few low-level spells such as the Windblade, Icicles, and the delaying and hastening spells, most other magic spells had their own cooldown time. After one use, one had to wait for the cooldown time to pass before one could use it again. This process was called the spell cycle. Everything had its rise and decline, and magic was no exception. When a spell was used, it would surely go into depletion, and then await the next cycle. This was the law of things. Of course, the time was not definitive. Many mages were able to compress the cooldown time with skills and mental strength, but such compression was almost negligible in most cases. Even a legendary mage as powerful as Anduin could only compress the cooldown time of mana retroaction by 2 seconds at most. And Lin Li, who possessed a sick mental strength, was in fact close to the legendary level in this aspect. He could almost do as much as Anduin could. But as far as the current situation was concerned, let alone doing what Anduin could do, even if he surpassed Anduin, it would be equally useless. Old Grim didn't even give him a chance to wait for the next cycle and proceeded to drown him in a large number of arcane missiles. In a zero-interference spellcasting state, it was similarly terrifying even with the strength of a magic shooter. The arcane missile shot down incessantly, and the elemental shield on Lin Li's body was extremely fragile. In a twinkling, the arcane missiles broke through the protection of the elemental shield and landed directly on Lin Li's body. Lin Li was barely hurt under the protection of the element's annihilation field, but there was a look of disappointment on his face. Since transmigrating, due to lack of actual combat, Lin Li had never been so miserable as he was today. The previous match with Old Merlin was more of mental strength, not to mention it was an absolute suppression of an archmage. Though Lin Li had lost in the end, it could be said to be a glorious defeat. But this time, Lin Li had lost, with nothing else to say. Throughout the battle, Old Grim did not use force beyond level 10. Even when he was using magic, he chose some of the lower level ones as much as possible. And the deciding factor, the mana retroaction deceit, left Lin Li chagrined. If he had been more composed then. Are you thinking you could have won if you had been more composed then? Old Grim's eyes seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. As soon as he opened his mouth, he said what Lin Li was thinking. Yes. No. Old Grim shook his head. You were composed enough. I could feel that you were struggling between elemental shield and mana retroaction, but it doesn't matter at all. Whether it was the elemental shield or the mana retroaction, anyone who enters the depletion cycle will undoubtedly lose. So, this has nothing to do with composure. There was a smile of admiration on Old Grim's aged face. Actually, you're doing quite well at your age. Whether in skills or rhythm, you've already reached the limit of your age. I know you still possess an enormous amount of mental strength. Even I almost suffered with that delirium spell. In this spar, you've lost due to the lack of experience. Experience? That's right, experience. Old Grim nodded and began analyzing the fight for him. I was actually affected by that delirium spell, but you were engrossed in the mental protection field and failed to judge the situation right. Didn't you realize? After casting the mental protection field, my casting speed was slower than usual, and why was that? That is because I had to divide some of my mental strength to suppress the negative effects brought by the delirium spell. Lin Li pondered over it carefully and realized it was indeed as Old Grim said. The latter's spellcasting speed had decreased significantly. If he had used a large number of low-level spells to suppress him then, the whole fight would have been a different story altogether. And that failed mana retroaction. If you have enough experience, it is entirely possible to judge quickly whether I was really releasing mana when I was reciting the spell. At this point, Old Grim paused for a while before delivering the conclusion. President Jirian is right, you need actual combat. After pointing out Lin Li's shortcomings, Old Grim identified the mistakes and highlights of the spar, then proceeded with a detailed analysis. It was almost evening by the time he finished. Old Grim saw that it was late, so he fixed a time with Lin Li for the next day before he left the Emerald Tower and disappeared into the darkness. Old Grim came every day in the days that followed. While Lin Li continued to make up for his lack of practical experience, the chaos carried on in Jirosa City. The victory that day had put Jirian in a good mood. He insisted on taking a few bottles of awakening potion from Lin Li as a reward for the group of mages who burned the 2 merchant ships down. Under the incentive of the awakening potion, the crowd's enthusiasm surged. Almost every day before dawn, the group of mages would depart from the Emerald Tower straight to the Merlin family's businesses in the city. Unfortunately, the Merlin family had shrunk completely because of the devastating blow that day. Dozens of magic shooters and more than 100 mages were searching around Jirosa City like a pack of hounds. Eventually, only a few abandoned businesses were found, as well as a few members of the Merlin family oblivious to the situation that dared to roam about at this sensitive moment. Under the threat of this horrifying force, the forces in the city were all the more miserable. They were living in fear every day, afraid that one of their men would offend the people from the Guild of Magic. This group of bastards was driven by bloodlust now. Anyone who provoked them would be poking at a hornet's nest. They were a group of real bandits, barbaric and unreasonable. Especially those of the 6 underground forces. Except old Odin, who had maintained a good relationship with the Guild of Magic all along, none of the remaining 5 forces were not in a state of apprehension. When the Guild of Magic was down and out, they had each done their fair share of treading upon them. Although not as arrogant as the Merlin family, to the point of directly interfering in the guild's affairs, those wicked things done behind the scenes had long been remembered by all the mages. These days, the leaders of the several forces were praying every day. They had never been so devout before. They were just hoping that the madness of the Guild of Magic would pass over soon, or the Merlin family quickly wiped out. Otherwise, if it continued like this, they would be driven to insanity. Almost everyone was cursing, not only that the Guild of Magic was a bunch of bandits, but also that the Merlin family was a herd of cowards. The most reviled of them all was Aaron Matsis of the Blood Brotherhood. He was really driven to the wall. Because of them running a few casinos with the Merlin family, it directly led to the people from the Guild of Magic smashing the casinos as soon as they saw one, regardless of whether the casinos were jointly run with the Merlin family or not. Aaron Matsis felt that he had been wronged. The bastards, Merlins, had offended the Guild of Magic, but somehow he was hurt as well. More than a dozen casinos controlled by the Blood Brotherhood were smashed in the week. Aaron Matsis' heart ached when he thought about it, and whenever his heart ached, he couldn't help but curse, "Fuck you, Merlin family. Your whole family was transformed from tortoises. You guys are at ease in hiding, while my casinos were smashed to ruins. If you have the guts, then hide forever. See how that old bastard, Jirian, is going to smash all your tortoise shells." Aaron Matsis' words were blood and tears, almost spitting onto the Merlin family's face. But even so, there was still no news from the Merlin family. The forbearance was absurd to all the Jirosa's forces. The Guild of Magic now was as arrogant as if someone had stepped on your head and peed in your face, and the Merlin family could still endure. This was just like the endurance ninja from Legends. Even within the Merlin family, perhaps only a handful of confidants, like Evan, knew that old Merlin endured only to wait for the duel that would take place a few days later. All the problems would cease to be problems after Cromwell killed Felix. The Guild of Magic's arrogance seemed to be stinking to the heavens, but in fact, they were nothing without the young mage. What about Jirian? Old Merlin was an archmage as well. The battle before the Emerald Tower had already proved that the two men were neck and neck. And with all the equipment hidden in the family, old Merlin was even more confident of defeating the most powerful mage of Gerosis. Only old Merlin, who had personally experienced the battle, knew how terrifying the young pharmacist was. It took only a bottle of blue potion to wipe out all his efforts. It was as if the winning ticket was held, but suddenly someone had struck you with a loud slap. What was most devastating to old Merlin was that, after Jirian had regained his mana, the young pharmacist had even brought out an extra bottle as a backup. The feeling of despair was still etched in old Merlin's heart. From that time on, he knew that to destroy the Guild of Magic, he had to kill the pharmacist first. So, old Merlin had been enduring. He did not even say a word when the two merchant ships in the canal were burned down, because he knew that the chance he had been waiting for was coming. Old Merlin constantly had faith in the coming duel. Because his only son, Cromwell, had broken through to level 13 this morning, this breakthrough finally gave the guilty old Merlin a glint of relief. Level 13 was a height that most mages could not achieve after a lifetime of hard work. Although this height was bought with no further progress for life. Looking at the confident Cromwell, old Merlin kept a twinge of guilt in his eyes. "Cromwell, how do you feel now?" "Very good, father." There was a faint trace of hysteria in Cromwell's confident eyes. The waterfall strike at the Emerald Tower was engraved in his mind. For Cromwell, it was a disgrace for life. He remembered vividly how he could not resist in front of the mage named Felix, and how he was thrown out of the Emerald Tower like a piece of garbage. So when old Merlin asked him if he would like to carry out the family's secret ritual after he came back, Cromwell agreed without hesitation. He knew that once the ritual was held, he would run out of his full potential and would not be able to make any further progress in his life. But Cromwell knew well that this would bring him a powerful strength, enough to easily kill Felix. Cromwell was imagining the whole time during the ritual, when he appeared with a powerful strength, would the hateful mage also show a look of fear in his eyes like how he did when he was lying on the steps of the Emerald Tower, looking up at him? Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.